Good on brand.
All right, we're gonna go. I'm gonna borrow someone's mic real quick. Thank you so much. There we go. All right. Hello. Thank you all so much for joining us, both virtually and in person. This is Left Bank Books presenting a conversation on special topics in being a parent. Tonight's authors are Bergman, author, storyteller, educator, and the founder and publisher of children's book press Flamingo Rampant. From the author of Staff Fave, Special Topics in Being a Human, we now dive into the world of parenting. Being a parent is enormously joyful, but it is also an enormous amount of work. Join us for a conversation about queer parenting with humor and compassion, and to discuss the various stages of the journey of being a parent. Before we start, I will go ahead and let you know that tonight's event is only possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books by shopping with us or by donating to our foundation, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps keep our bookstore open, and it also helps to keep your streets paid, your libraries funded, your parks free, and your booksellers fed. It also helps writers get the support that they most certainly deserve. And so when you buy a book at the front desk tonight, we invite you to also make a donation to the Left Bank Books Foundation, so we can continue to produce vital literary events for our community. We thank you all for shopping local, supporting this event, and supporting Left Bank Books and our foundation. My name is Danielle King. I'm our general manager and some other stuff. I get to help our fantastic events coordinator, Shane Mullen, to produce the hundreds of author events we do each year with our fantastic team here in St. Louis. And for tonight's authors, there's a bit in here I'm supposed to do about in-person events, but y'all are here. You get it. As I mentioned, Bergman is an author, storyteller, educator, and the founder and publisher of Flamingo Rampant, which makes feminist, culturally diverse children's picture books celebrating LGBTQ+, kids and families. He writes creative nonfiction for grown-ups, fiction for adults, and the advice column Asking Bear, and was the co-editor, along with Kate Bornstein, of Gender Outlaws, which I own and had not fully realized. So that was very exciting. And also, of course, as I mentioned, book we are absolutely obsessed with here at Left Bank, Special Topics in Being Human. I also get to do a very cool thing, which is introduce you to my very good friend, Ben Greene. Ben Greene is an author, public speaker, queer inclusion consultant, and openly transparent. Ben has dedicated his career to spreading empathy, awareness, and understanding about the transgender community. He is active on a speaking circuit with audiences ranging from UK's Diversity Live to NASA. And I want a pen. He resides in St. Louis and is a guest lecturer on DEI at Cornell University, as well as serving on the board of Tufts, the Tufts Master's degree in DEI. His book that just came out not terribly long ago, My Child is Trans, Now What? A Joy-Centered Approach to Support, is a powerful book for readers aiming to support trans youth by breaking the mold, offering a judgment-free guide to folks across generations, millennial parents, members of older generations who may not have had great exposure to trans community folks, and what systems exist to support trans youth and how loved ones can help. Yeah, it's a long flirt, but it's my friend. On behalf of Left Bank Books, please help me to give a warm welcome to Bergman and Ben Greene.
Wow, thank you so much for coming out to little St. Louis. It's great to have you here.
I am delighted to be here. Did I turn off my microphone? Yes. Still delighted to be here. I've actually been a Left Bank fan for a long time, so it's very nice to be able to get here to do a book event.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to jump right in. I've got some pre-prepared questions.
Excellent.
This book is it was so fun to read. It's also very pretty. The art in it is extremely beautiful. I think that you all maybe know that already. I know you know that already. I'm curious, why did you write this? Why now? Tell us a little more about how you got to this book being here in the world today.
I got into advice giving generally because I had complaints. And this is a very common story in my life where I sort of look at something and I think, I don't love that. And then I keep looking to sort of try and find okay, who's doing a better job? Surely there's and very often, eventually, I find someone who I think is doing a good enough job, and then I'm like, okay, great, That's their job, and I cannot do that thing. But in the world of advice giving at that time, I didn't really find that. I found a lot of advice that felt very one size fits all. A lot of sort of off the rack, if this is your problem, then here is a solution kind of advice giving. And it always just sort of made me itchy. Like, maybe this will work for some people, but it isn't going to work for everyone. And, there's no way to give advice that works for everyone, but you can at least sort of say, here are some things to note, right? And that troubled me somewhat about advice giving. So I, out of a combination of ego and really looking for a, sanctioned opportunity to go ahead and be a busybody and a know-it-all. Like I like to give advice, so it's very helpful if I have a sanctioned location in which I can do that. Because otherwise it just sort of, I have to really work hard to like not give unsolicited advice. And so I got started in advice giving, and I found that I really liked it, and that other people also liked the advice that I had to offer, so that was good and encouraging. And then I did special topics in being a human, which was my first illustrated advice book, and that went really well. People really liked it and found it not only helpful, but sort of, reassuring. And then my publisher sort of said, what else do you got? And I discovered that what I really wanted to talk about next was parenting. And at that point, we had 3 kids, and the youngest was 8 and the oldest was 28. And I had been through a lot of the stages of parenting a couple of times. And so I felt like, okay, well, again, I feel like I've made enough mistakes to have, useful things to offer. I'm not, I know it sounds funny to say, but I'm not naturally good at it. Just like I'm not naturally good at like people's stuff necessarily. I spend a lot of time watching and thinking about what did I do and why did it work out that way and what can I do better next time so that I can, make my impact match my intention, which is a gap that I'm sort of always trying to close, and in my advice giving, always trying to help other people close. And so after, 14 years of mistakes and some fairly hard learning, I felt like I knew enough about parenting to give it a try. I also really, and again, this is where the complaint turns into I started a project part comes in. A lot of the parenting books that I encountered were very gendered. They weren't really about parenting so much as they were about like mom stuff or dad stuff. And the dad ones were not, they were not great.
Garage, baby.
It was very like, kind of, it was, sometimes they felt like they'd been written in a sports bar. It was very like, do some dishes once in a while. Little lady's gonna love that. Which like, yes, do some dishes once in a while. Like that's good advice, sure, but it's 2024. I feel like there are a lot of people, regardless of genders, who really want to be engaged, present, thoughtful parents, and they're trying to figure out how to live their progressive values as parents. And, a lot of us maybe have not had great modeling about that. And that's true, I think, even among people who basically have had pretty good parents sometimes. Like, okay, but also conversations are different, questions are different, the expectations of parenting are different than they were, in 1974, which is when I was born, because I'm very old. And so I just thought, I think I can add something to the conversation about parenting. And that is what I thought I could add. Or that's as much as I could fit in the book.
Yeah.
It's already 3 pounds, but there's a million things that I probably could have talked more about and ended up having to cut just because there wasn't space.
Yeah.
I did my best.
I think you did a great job. I think you added something really meaningful to the conversation. I know I'm a hopeful future parent. My wife and I are figuring out what our journey is. And I gotta say, as I was reading this to prep for the event, I was like, Samantha, come look at this. This is so cool. She's like, yeah, I'm gonna be a full-time surgeon, so you do a really good job looking at that, and I'm gonna be there to help.
Fair enough. It's good to have. There's an illustration in the part about gender roles. Do you know the one I mean?
Oh, yes, I do.
So there's an illustration in the part about gender roles, which is about the fact that other people will make assumptions about what parents do which parts depending on their perceived genders. And there's this part about how, until your kid can tell them at school themselves, like, please call my dad and not my mom. And there is, in fact, an illustration of a woman surgeon taking a call in the operating room from a school administrator to say, like, oh, Rifa forgot her lunch, or whatever is the thing. So
Yes, I did make her look at that picture. I planned most of our wedding and regularly got asked, do you have permission to make this decision? Do you want us to wait until your wife is free? And I said, she's delivering a baby. She's not free.
That's not happening. You're gonna just have to deal with me.
Yeah, so I really appreciated all the things you had to add, but in particular breaking down those ideas of this is what a certain gender has to do to parent. I think that was really well done.
Thank you. I almost didn't write a chapter about gender.
Really?
I couldn't figure out how to distill all of the things that I had
There's
to
a lot.
say, right? It was like, I'm gonna write one chapter. Like, this is a graduate seminar. We're meeting every Tuesday from 6 until 9. I can't put it all in but I eventually, took a deep breath and did my best to just hit the high points along the way. But I really had to be talked into it. I really did. People were like, if you don't, who's going to? It's like, well, surely there are other people who are writing about gender roles and parenting, and there are, and some of them are good actually, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did it. I really admire the amount of self-awareness that you bring to this, because this is, as you said, a book born out of 14 years of mistakes and learnings. And I'm so curious about your process and what we can all learn from that, of being able to identify, oh, this is a lesson that my kid is teaching me right now. This is a mistake that I'm making that, second kid's gonna have a much easier time, right? Whatever it is, you're so self-aware and looking for lessons to learn and ways you can improve. What's your process like of figuring out when there are moments that your kids are teaching you something?
I love the idea that I'm aware of it in the moment when it's happening. That's almost never true, but I love the idea. I do. What is more true is that I receive feedback one way or the other that I have not done a good job. And then I start trying to figure out what a better job would look like. Parenting is an iterative process. You try and fail and try again. And just like, I think about the days of having an infant, right? Like a little 2 or 3 week old baby, brand new, just baked. And, they cry. And so first you're like, okay, are you hungry? No, not hungry. Okay, do you need a diaper change? No, it's not that. Okay, are you hot? Are you cold? Do you have gas? And you just sort of keep trying things until something works. And you're like, something worked. Amazing. And then the next time that they cry, you try that thing first. Of course, it does not work because that's what works, in the morning or yesterday. So that's not, of course, you're almost never going to get off that easy. But so then you try everything you can think of again, and something else works. And so, for me as a parent, I think I really I guess I should also probably say that I am just by nature a self-improver. I'm sort of always like, oh, I could be doing a better job. Let's figure out how. And I really applied that to parenting. And I think one of the things that helped me is that it's not that I didn't get discouraged in the moments. I certainly did. There were plenty of times where I was like, well, I don't know what you want. Somebody said to me at one point that pediatrics below a certain age is really like veterinary medicine. Like they can't tell you what they want. You have to figure it out based on like what noises they're making and what observations you can make. A lesson I learned very strongly one day when my 4-year-old said, my neck hurts. Right? They'd been feverish and feeling unwell, and then they were like, my neck hurts. And so immediately I was like, it's meningitis. Right? Which was like the thing that everybody was worried about when I was a kid. Apparently meningitis isn't as much of a problem now, but that was where right? And so immediately we went to the children's hospital. I was like, my child has a fever, and they said their neck hurts. And of course, all of the nurses were like, oh yes, you did the right thing coming in. This is a very, Turns out a lot of 4-year-olds don't know the difference between neck and throat. So that was a thing that I learned that day, that this child had a slight fever and felt sort of punky, and their throat hurt, which I probably would not have gone to the hospital for a sore throat, right? But like, I think in order to make your way through, especially the beginning parts, but it doesn't really change that much. Like, to a certain degree, I think you have to be comfortable or get comfortable with a lot of failure. Just so much. And they're not necessarily major failures, right? Like, you can do 7 things for a baby who's crying and the 8th one works. But the first 7 are no. And so I think there's a way that it really teaches you to, keep paying attention and keep trying, but also that if you try something and it doesn't work, it's not, the end of the world. It's just time to try a different thing. Both in parenting and, I have to say, as an artist, these are good, right? Like this is useful stuff. And so for me, I think as an artist and as a parent, the sort of ongoing realization that I was going to get it wrong a lot more times than I was going to get it right became sort of my ongoing companion in both of those arenas. And it helped me to sort of look at my failures less as I'm a terrible person. Although still sometimes I feel like a terrible person and a terrible parent. But in the longer term, I was able to recognize, okay, well, I have tried and failed, and so now I have to figure out what is the next thing. But also then sometimes the successes aren't visible immediately either, which is, I think, the other thing that really helped me. I'll give you a very recent example from literally yesterday. So I was away. I had already left for my trip. My husband and my oldest child is now, grown. She lives by herself. She's a whole adult. But we have, she's technically my stepdaughter, although I don't really call her that. I do sometimes refer to her as the world's best ever free gift with purchase, which I assure you she thinks is both funny and charming. I said it to somebody recently, and they looked at me like, and how does she feel about it? I was like, oh no, that's where she's.
She's in on it.
So, right. This isn't a secret. So my husband and our 14-year-old had gone out to do grocery shopping, and our 9-year-old decided to stay home with our dog and watch a show, and so that's what happened. And his iPad needed to be charged, so he tried to plug it in. We have like a charging station, the thing where you can like rack up all the devices at night and plug them in so people don't, take them to their rooms and stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning Googling Pokemon or whatever. and he couldn't get it to charge. And so then he decided to try to like get the plug to seat more correctly in the outlet, and it broke. Like the metal prong sheared right off in the socket. And he felt bad about this, and he used his Jenga blocks to spell out an apology on the floor. He wrote, "I'm sorry," in Jenga blocks. But what he didn't do was try to fix it himself before Jay got home. He wasn't afraid that he would be in big trouble because he had broken something. He just left it alone until an adult could come and help him. I know a lot of people who at the age of 9 would have been more afraid of their parents figuring out that they'd broken something than of getting electrocuted trying to solve the problem. And it could have been awful. It could have been, not that Jay got home to an aggravating problem that required 2 trips to Home Depot to fix, but like a child who had been really injured or electrocuted. Sometimes I think, when I heard about it, I was like, oh, I'm sorry that you have to go to Home Depot. That sucks. You're solo parenting. It's the beginning of a long solo parenting stretch while I'm away. Like, I'm really sorry. He was like, it's okay. I'm just going to go to Home Depot and get the thing and, replace the outlet or whatever because he's handy. And it wasn't until late last night or this morning that both of us went, oh, shit. Like, that could have been a real disaster. If that kid had been afraid to confess that he'd broken something, then he could have been badly hurt trying to fix it before anyone got home. And a lot of the examples are like that. Often it takes longer to figure out, what we did right that we weren't necessarily aware of. And I want to be very clear, my husband actually figured it out before I did. He's the one who said, I just realized something. but so much of it just happens in long retrospect, where suddenly you look up and think, oh, hey, good news, we did something right. And it's a very satisfying moment, but like it happens some number of hours to years, often after the thing actually happens. And there's a way in which I think that also helps, like being able to recognize not just the things that I've done wrong, which are legion, like let's be real, but also the things that I have somehow managed to not mess up is helpful and also really good. And so I think overall it's just really like, once I eventually figure things out, I think about all the times that I did it wrong. And then, of course, immediately I want to save other people the trouble, right? Like, you don't have to make this mistake 50 times. I made it 50 times. You can just read this and then not have to have it at all. Won't that be nice for everyone? And so I think, to some degree it's, I don't know, by nature, and to some degree it's just not necessarily naturally being that good at it, and to some degree it's ego, and to some degree it's just once I finally figure out something that I think is useful, I really am like, let's tell everybody, right? Like, good news.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. I love that. That makes a lot of sense, that the victories are much harder to see than the failures because they might not be as immediate. So true. Yeah, I love that. Switching gears a little bit to talk about something that I found particularly beautiful in the book was this idea of the family garden instead of the family tree. If you haven't read the book yet, essentially it's this beautiful idea that a family tree tells you exactly how important everybody has to be. You don't have a whole lot of choice in it. The family garden says there are so many different ways you might relate to people, and a garden needs a gardener. You have much more agency in the family garden than you do with a family tree, which I really resonated with that. And so I'm curious for you, what is the process of being the gardener for your family garden and figuring out where people fit, and what brought about the idea for that kind of changing the frame?
And maybe I'm going to answer that question in the reverse order.
Great.
But really, we're a queer family. We have 2 dads. My husband and I are both trans. The linear family tree situation was sort of immediately kind of a non-starter. And we have always been, I think, very much people who live in community and who have, close people that we want in our kids' lives. And also we made babies with the help of a third person who brought the sperm, and he also had, a family, and right? And so all just, from the first moment, a family tree felt like there was no chance. And we had a couple of sort of funny moments with it when the kids were little, and I remember one very fondly where one of the children came home from a draw all the people in your family exercise, reporting that they had to ask for extra paper several times. And they brought home this there was a whole thing about your household versus your family. And they had taped all of these pieces of paper together to make this sort of giant situation that included everybody that they felt they would want to include in a family tree. And I just right? So like this is one of those moments where I looked at it 10 years ago and was like, this is delightful. And you are delightful. And I love it. And we, put it up. And every time I walked past it, I felt all soft about it. But then over time, things would happen. Like the kids would be doing a family tree activity at school, and we would have to sort of gently get involved in that. Or I would hear from people who also had more complex family creation stories that they too were struggling with this thing. And sometimes that was kids who'd been adopted, kids who had more or fewer than two parents, kids who were being raised by relatives who weren't their parents, or had parents who were not in the picture, or just, inconsistent, right? Like all kinds of things. And so I started to think about this idea of what would it look like to make sure that all of those people got to be included in everybody, in the family garden, or the family representation for each person or for each child. And, right, trees suggested garden easily. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh yeah, that's right. What's funny is I'm not a gardener at all in real life. My husband, who is from a farming family and has, 11 green thumbs, and could plant a shoe and grow a shoe tree, has taught me everything I know about gardening. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was really a gardening metaphor for everything that I wanted to include, including like that you have to plant mint in a pot or it will overrun your whole garden. And I think we know some people like that. And that some people that you like in your garden are spiky. And so you have to put them someplace where people aren't going to accidentally poke themselves. And that, you can have 2 or more flowers or plants that are very complementary. You plant them beside each other and they grow better. And then others that are not, and you have to give them space because they both like nitrogen, or they both need potassium, and so you can't. We're in like deep gardening now. Right? There's there are a few things that people, right? Yes, I have gardeners in the house. That there are some things, plants can be greedy for a certain nutrient. And if you plant 2 things that are greedy for the same nutrient in the same place, they won't thrive as well as they would if you plant them separately. That felt useful to think about. And also that not everyone's family garden will look the same, right? Like I was very close with my grandmother, my father's mother, until she died when I was like in my early 40s. I had her for a long time, which was wonderful. But by all accounts, she was a very difficult mother. And so my relationship and my parents really like kind of made a point of letting me go ahead and have the relationship with her that I was going to have, without interfering too much. But like if I were drawing out my family garden, I would draw her close to me. I miss her and still a lot. But I'm not sure how close my father or my uncle would want her in their family gardens, right? Or I think about things like seasons, and again, being married to a farm boy, like literally this man has done back alley deals for buckets of bruised peaches in order to make a chutney, right? Like at the end of the farmer's market day, because that's when you can. When the trees are just like dumping their fruit everywhere and you're in the season of incredible abundance, you get in there and you have as much of it as you can, but then maybe you don't get it again for a long time. And there are also people in my life like that. I see them and I'm so happy to see them. And we just are very close for a short period of time. And then I don't see them again for another year or 2 years or 5 years. And so that too felt useful to think about, like how do we represent that experience? For me, I think as the, gardener of my own family garden, and, at this point really just sort of the apprentice gardener of my children's gardens, they're really in charge now, and I just, weed that, water this. I don't necessarily do a lot anymore, but we have very close people, a lot of them in California and in New York, but we don't live in either of those places. And so for me, with the amount of money that we spent traveling to New York and traveling to California so that the kids could be with the important people in person and really deepen those relationships while they were little, we could have, they could have a stamp on every page of their passport, right? We could have traveled the world. That is a values choice that we made. And I'm not trying to be prescriptive here. There are also very good things about, traveling the world. For me, it felt important to give our time and our attention and our money to going to see our people over and over again, year upon year. And now we've reached the point where those relationships are really in full flower, to the point where, after our 14-year-old was B'nai Mitzvah last year, 2 years ago, one of their B'nai Mitzvah gifts was a trip to California by themselves. And they went from house to house of all of the people that I have been close with for, 20 plus years in most cases, and had a fantastic time, and everybody enjoyed themselves. And, those relationships belong to them now. And those people are part of their family garden in a way that I think really can only happen with that kind of in-person time. So I think if I did anything as, the gardener, while that was still a role that was available to me, that was probably the most useful choice that Jay and I made, was to spend our time and money doing that rather than doing any of a number of other kinds of travel or other things, buying a nice car or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I love your consistency throughout the book to saying when I don't know what to do, I go to my values. I figure out what is most important to us right now. And I think that was really beautifully clear throughout this book of what's important to you both, and of taking the time to figure that out and apply it consistently as best you could.
Yes, consistently. That's
It seems consistent to me.
I mean, sure, in the book,
Yeah.
right? That's the thing, is that, one of there's a whole chapter about this in the book, the chapter about that in order to enjoy parenting, you have to zoom out. Because otherwise it's very easy to fall into the trap of you're a good parent the day they eat fruit, and a bad parent the day they eat pizza in the back of the car. And I had it took a little while for me to shake loose of the idea that I was not being judged on my daily performance metrics. Like I was when I was in graduate school, I worked at Radio Shack. Is there still Radio Shack? Oh, it's sad. Where do you go when you just need a diode? I guess the internet.
Micro Center maybe.
Probably. Anyway, but like at the end of every day, they would, look at your sales numbers and how many people you'd gotten to sign up for the credit card and how many people you had sold like a warranty package to, et cetera, et cetera. And, there were like rankings on the whiteboard of who had done the best and the second and the and I feel like the way that people talk about parenting as an activity, it's very easy to imagine that, tummy time, sleep hours, protein, servings of vegetables, screen time, activities, right? Like if you don't do all of the things every day, then your children will be damaged beyond repair in some way that you will only find out about in family therapy 25 years later, right? Which that's, maybe still, but I started to really think about the value of zooming out and looking at a whole week or a whole month or a quarter or whatever. Like, did they go to bed at a reasonable time on Halloween? Absolutely not. Like, we didn't even see it. They were still out trick-or-treating at bedtime, right? Like, I couldn't, 25 minutes later with a sack full of chips and candy, they came in just to drop off their chips and candy, and then they went, right? Like, But then a couple of days later, we went to the pool and we swam and played for like a while in the afternoon, and everybody was exhausted and they were all sacked out by 7:30, 8 o'clock. Okay, well, if you take an average, everybody's getting enough sleep, right? But the thing is that if it's always about, did I do all of the things today, then you never sort of have room for the occasions of joy, whether that's, a truly exceptional amount of Halloween candy. So much. Or whatever is the thing, right? Like, having that mindset overall, I think, is really helpful in parenting to kind of, I don't know. Otherwise, I think it's very easy to get really wrapped up in a certain kind of like performance metric mindset rather than being with your kid. Like, okay, well, we're gonna just, I guess, stay home and listen to jazz piano and do puzzles all day. All right. Oh, and draw mazes. Great. We're just gonna sit here, like 3 bumps on a log, and do that. And then tomorrow they're gonna bounce on the trampoline until I'm like, we have to go. Right? At a certain point, you just have to zoom out.
Do life. You have to live.
Yes, and I think it's hard for parents, especially when they feel uncertain, or when they feel new, or when they're getting a lot of judgment from whoever is in their life that judges them, to let go a little bit of the like daily performance metric mindset and lean into the like zoom out experience, which makes the whole business a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. So I have one more question preset, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions from you all and from the lovely folks online. But speaking of zooming out and letting go of assumptions or what people should or shouldn't be or do, how can we resist pre-setting paths for our children, assuming, okay, you're gonna be this, you're gonna do this, and how can we help others avoid doing the same, whether about our own kids or, maybe if we see them doing it about their kids, right? How can we, and that's also loaded of like, when and where can you give advice to other people about their parenting? Probably never. But yeah, how can we avoid putting our kids on a path?
I mean, I think for me, the questions are always like, what am I really steering toward? Thank you. Where are we going? So is it, do I want my child to be married, or do I want them to have, people in their life who love and support them? Do I want them to, right? Like, do I want them to have a specific occupation, or do I want them to choose something that serves their needs, whether that's, that they're pursuing their passion, or that they're pursuing their passion and that the thing they do for work is like how they, pay the rent and put food on the table so that they can pursue some other passion. So the questions are like, is this like I want a path that leads toward love and companionship. Does it have to be romantic love? No. Does it have to be with one other person? No. Does it have to be a person of a certain gender? No. Right? The experience that I want them to have is feeling, all of the good things, right? Like met and seen and supported and loved, someone who will hold their best self, even when they're not acting like their best self. Currently my job, right? But like I will share that with other people when the time comes. You want them to have a life, in their work that where they feel like they're doing what they want to be doing. And sometimes that's going to be, like my littlest right now really wants to join Cirque du Soleil. That is his goal. And I'm here to tell you, I've known a lot of children who have had goals like, I'm going to be in Cirque du Soleil. It's not out of the question for this child in particular. I'm just going to say that. This is what I remind myself as I take him to aerial acrobatics class and ballet class and contemporary dance class and the rest of it. And frankly, he would do more classes if we would allow it. That's enough. This is what happens. I picked an adventure model husband, and now I have adventure model children. And they always want to be going somewhere and doing something. Right, so like that's what I want them to have, all of the good stuff where they get to do things and they get to feel accomplished and they're, participating, right? What exactly that looks like in the details, I think is not that important. And so for me as a parent, being able to, try not to set them on a path kind of starts with, somewhat paradoxically, setting them on a path, but it's a values path, right? Rather than a specific vocation or avocation or religion or sexual orientation or relationship style or whatever, right? Like it's really sort of reinforcing the idea that the people in your life and the things that you do should be, joyful and reciprocal and satisfying to the degree that that is possible. And yes, there are always going to be trade-offs, but that, that moving toward the thing that is that feels satisfying to them is the thing that I want for them. I try very hard not to give other people parenting advice like in the wild. I am assisted considerably by the fact that I got to do that, and also that I get to go on CBC, which is like Canadian, NPR, and do parenting commentary every few weeks about like a current topic. So I also get to do like ongoing advice giving. You have no idea. You're laughing, but you have no idea the depth of my desire to help people find a better path sometimes. What I do sometimes do is when I see something that is starting to look damaging or dangerous, very often I will sort of do like a little empathy interruption. Like the kid is having a big meltdown temper tantrum and everybody's looking, the parent is starting to get embarrassed and or ashamed, and I can see that they're starting to have a really big feeling about it, and I'm beginning to become concerned that they're about to take that feeling out on a child who's just completely dysregulated and cannot get their shit together because they can't even see it from where they're sitting like they want to, is actually the thing that sometimes is the most clear, is that the kid really wants to calm themselves, but they can't. They're too hungry, or they're too tired, or everything's too new, or they've just lost the ability to rein themselves in. Which is when I like to tell the story of one of my children's first true temper tantrum, face down, kicking and screaming, the whole, if you called central casting and said, show me a temper tantrum, that is what you'd get, which was when we were in Havana, Cuba, and I would not allow my 2-year-old to eat a cigar butt out of a puddle in a literal gutter. Which, just considering Havana is probably 30% horse piss by volume. And for whatever reason, and I to this day couldn't tell you why, this child was determined that all they wanted was to pick it up, and I was guessing eat it, because that was sort of how they interacted with many things at that time, and I would not allow this because I am a monster. Clearly.
How dare you?
How dare I indeed? You'd be the depths of my depravity. No bounds. I make children wear hats. I am the worst. And I tell this story sort of to people because then they laugh, because it's terrible and ridiculous and so funny. And then it just turns their internal temperature down a little bit, and they don't feel as judged. They feel more kept company in the terrible moment that they're having with their kid. And then they can it's just enough of a pause that they can very often kind of gather themselves a little bit and then help their kid, rather than just thinking about what all of the people are thinking or sometimes saying about the fact that their kid is having a meltdown. So I don't tend to, I just feel like parents already get enough judgment. I try really hard not to add to it outside of a very small number of topics. But I do find that often if I can tell a story about some ridiculous parenting thing that happened to me, or to us, then I can just let the air out of that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. And that story is really, how could you? But I get it.
You'll be pleased to know that the child in question did eventually forgive me for my crimes with the help of a street clown and some caramel. We made it through, but it was a moment. And of course, everyone's looking at you like you're the worst. I was just like, I'm not work, because you're just holding a child who is screaming and trying to get away from you, and it feels overwhelming.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have time for you all to ask some
Yeah,
questions.
we have like 5 or 10 minutes left for a few questions, either in the room or from the online space, for which I think maybe we need. Aha! Nope, there are not questions in the.
No, just
In the online
hellos.
room?
Just hellos.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
To the people. Hello, internet.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe there are questions in the room. It's okay if not. We're pretty close to time.
I don't have a question, I just have appreciations. The garden metaphor, everything you said like touches home in so many different ways. Aside from the fact that I'm writing a dissertation in this area and resonate with everything you're saying. It just the imagery that you provided feels so expansive, and like being able to extend my own sense of kinship beyond blood, beyond marriage, beyond and like humans even into like the rest of the world. It just like it gives me a sense of it gives me a new image to look at my relationships with and feel like more abundant. Because as a parent, like sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't have friends anymore because I don't have time for friends. But this tree is holding me, or you know, these other ways of being held through this whatever family making process. So thank you. I can't wait to read your book.
I'm really glad.
Can I ask, you mentioned the trips for connecting with other parts of your garden. Were there rituals or habits or practices that you built in other than those trips to kind of tend that garden? I'm just gonna keep going with the metaphor.
We tried, but it's very challenging when kids are little to keep in touch via digital or electronic or even like mail means. It's just not the same, right? They don't get the same hit.
Yeah.
And I really thought that we were gonna do, more regular video chats and more regular this or that or whatever. But it never really worked out in the way that I had imagined until they were like 12 or 13. Until they had really kind of claimed their own authority to some degree over their communication streams.
Yeah.
And so now I find out, sometimes I find out what is happening with my friends in California from my 14-year-old who's like, oh, Peggy Sue's in Hawaii. I'm like, oh, great. Like, yep, here she is with coconut. Like, that's fantastic. I love this news. I didn't know that, but right, like it's not, I don't feel bad about it. Like I don't, this isn't someone who would necessarily apprise me of their every plan. But that is about the age in my experience, right about 12, 13, where they start to assert and attend to those connections themselves. But most of my trying to make it happen didn't really happen. They would just, I would occasionally give the news, like, oh, so-and-so is doing such and such. And the kids would be like, oh, cool. But then, like, we would see them in, February, which is when we would typically go to California because I live in Canada. So, in February, you're ready to go. And it would be like no time had passed. They would just settle in and, whatever, climb the lemon tree and go to the ice cream and do all the things, like full of joy and enthusiasm to really revel in those connections, which is how the part in the family garden about people being in a season of abundance happened, because that is how I was able to understand what was happening. It's not that they were, like they were harvesting all year or eating all year or picking flowers up, like whatever metaphor you want to use, but then for a little while it would just be like, all these people all the time for days in a row, and they would just get to really gorge themselves in that. And then we would leave, and then it would be another year. And sometimes somebody would, miss somebody, or it would feel a little hard, and I'd be like, okay, well, let's call them, and we'd like have a call. But none of my attempts to ritualize any kind of ongoing long distance connection situation ever really took hold. Yeah.
That's good to know.
I think we're out of time. Thank you all for being here, both in person and on the internet. And Ben, I thank you for all those really good questions. I really enjoyed them. I have to say, listen, I get to talk to a lot of people, and sometimes the questions are just great. Also that, but I decided to give it a different frame. But that is also true. But I really enjoyed this. Thank you, and thank you so much to Left Bank and to Danielle and Shane and everybody here for hosting us. What a treat.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Round of applause for Bear and Ben.